Okay, hi everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Dan. I'm your room host this morning for our session, Changing Role of Media. This is in the policy track. I want to say a quick thank you to our presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest. As a reminder, if you do have any questions or comments, please keep them respectful and you can drop them on the right side of Huva, and I'll go ahead and pass those over to our moderator. And our moderator this morning is Randy Evans. Go ahead and take it away, Randy.
Thanks, Dan. I want to welcome everyone. I think we have a good group assembled, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Newsrooms in Iowa and across the United States are facing unprecedented challenges these days as the business models meet the pandemic, social unrest, the political chasm that exists in our country. I will introduce the panelists and we will get going. First, I would like to welcome Carol Hunter, who is the editor of the Des Moines Register. Welcome, Carol.
Glad to be here, Randy.
Also with us is Adam Carros, who's the news director of KCRG TV9 there in Cedar Rapids. Adam?
Thanks, Randy. Nice to be here.
And last but certainly not least is Zack Kucharski, who's the editor of the Cedar Rapids Gazette and who has been neck deep in helping put together today's conference.
Morning, Randy.
Carol, let's get started, and I would invite all of the panelists to weigh in as you see fit, and remind people in the audience if you have questions to submit those. Carol, now that you are in your second century of journalism, how has the profession changed during that time? And is the change for the better or not?
Thanks a lot for describing it that way, Randy.
I thought you'd appreciate it.
I find this time in journalism to be very sobering. So I've been with the Register now coming up on 16 years, and more than twice that as a professional journalist. And the size of staff of the Des Moines Register, newsroom staff, is less than half now what it was when I walked in the door 16 years ago. The business model has just been bludgeoned by the internet and changes in reading habits and resulting changes in where people are looking for advertising and other means of communication. One simply cannot do with less than half the staff what newspapers did for so long, and that's dramatically affected how much coverage we can do. I like to think, and I believe that our best investigative work is just as good as it has ever been, and sometimes better, our best storytelling. But there are whole layers of, say, coverage of local government that we simply do not do anymore. Coverage of the local schools, the level that we were. We tend to cover them more in a broad way. Things like the local arts coverage is much skimpier than it used to be. And I think that leaves our communities less rich. There's just another piece of lack of cohesion there when information about your local community isn't easily available. I also have never, after this many years in the business, I'm quite dismayed when people seem to act, people in even very high places, as if facts don't matter. Because if we can't agree on a set of facts, I think it's very difficult for people to then agree on how to govern. So a sobering time, but come back at me later, Randy, and I'll have some more optimism about different.
Well, thank you, Carol. I think you've certainly laid out a good overview of what confronts us today in this session. Adam, the pandemic and the social justice protests this summer have created all sorts of challenges that journalists may not have had to confront in your time in the business. How have you and your staff adapted, and what lessons have you taken away that are going to stick with you? Adam?
There we go. I didn't have the power to unmute there for a second, but now I'm unmuted. No, I think to echo what Carol said, even the short time that I've been in this industry, only 1 century, the amount of change that has come in the industry has been tremendous and dramatic, and is really it's a struggle to keep up with. And I think the last 6 months is that, on steroids. It's really been an adjustment across the board for our journalists, and I know for all journalists, to figure out how to work in that environment and that culture right now. So when you're talking about lessons learned going forward, the one that sticks out to me, I think, through all of this is the trust factor. And Carol kind of hit on it a little bit with the, being able to agree on a set of facts. And I think we've collectively as journalists sometimes take for granted the idea that people will trust us, because we are the Des Moines Register, the Gazette, and KCRG, these 3 very well-respected brands in the journalism industry. And we do have a high degree of trust, but that doesn't make it universal. And that doesn't make it lessen our responsibility to be transparent with our readers, with our viewers, of where we're getting information from, how we're telling our stories, how we're gathering those facts, and what facts we are including, and even sometimes what facts we are dismissing. So I think that's been a big one for me, that we've really tried to work with our staff on, especially the younger reporters really don't understand the value that trust has, and not just in the short term, but in the long run as well. That we're able to really be transparent in our processes, and show people where we're getting that information from, and why you should trust us, and why you should trust the reporting we've been able to put together. Some of the investigations we've seen on a national level, the New York Times, for example, with the IRS findings, is tremendous journalistic work. But I haven't seen it really change anything in the narrative, because there is already a narrative of, can you trust the New York Times, from a certain segment of the population? And I think those are the things that I've taken away personally, and I've tried to convey to some of the younger journalists of, you need to show your work, you need to build up that trust at all times, even on little things. You can't just dismiss and expect people to trust you. That it really is a paramount portion of our job that we need to devote time to and effort to every single day on every single story.
And I would echo that. I think trust is hard to earn, easy to lose. But to bring something new into the conversation, I think it's also important to recognize that the way that people are communicating, and even the modes of how we have to gather the information, are more complex than I think they've ever been. And so there are entire systems that you have to get in and to understand in order to be able to communicate. And so, how do you tell a story digitally becomes very different than how you do it in a print medium. And so we have to be thinking about that. And how do you have the same meaning? And also from the technology, I think systems have evolved so that, if you don't want to communicate facts, there are ways to get around that. And you can use systems, and policies are slow to keep up with some of those things. And so there are digital pieces that you can use as communication tools that, maybe don't have to be turned over to reporters and the public in things like open records requests.
I want to stay with you, Zack. The derecho this summer probably stretched you and your staff in ways that you wondered if you were going to be able to handle. How has the derecho and its impact on Cedar Rapids affected the way the Gazette does business?
Well, I can say that the derecho coming amidst the COVID-19 pandemic were truly unique for us. And by chance, a group of editors were in the office together. We've been working remote since March, but we were moving office space. And we actually were in, as the derecho went through, the new office to do a quick tour and to talk about it. And so by chance, that allowed us to respond quickly. I have no idea how we would have done that if we were trying to communicate with everyone without power or cell service. And so from that standpoint, we were able to mobilize quickly and get planning and get people at least lugging computers to a power source that we had at the printing press. But a lot of our focus as a news gathering organization had been focused on digital. And suddenly, without power and without some of the cell connection that we needed, it was back to the tried and true print model of you needed to print out information and distribute that. And so suddenly, in the midst of it, you're trying to kind of reprogram everybody. You want to be gathering and putting things out digitally because people in faraway spaces could hear, but some of the people that needed the information the most weren't necessarily able to connect with the way that we have grown to provide that. And so we were partnering to print out flyers of meal sites and distributing those things across the city. And it's ironic to me because you think, okay, we've gone past that, but you also realize how much you give up when you can't communicate by cell phone, and all of those interactions that you've built efficiencies around are gone. And so for us, it was kind of a reminder of some of the tried and true methods still work, and they're important for us to go back to and be able to pivot either to digital or away from digital in order to move forward quickly.
Back to the future. So, staying on this notion of trust, how can the media, how can we change that distrust that's out there? Adam referenced the New York Times investigation of the president's tax returns, but the widespread skepticism about the veracity of it. Are the things that you, Zack and Carol, can see yourselves and your staffs doing going forward to address this in some way?
I certainly wish I had a magic bullet for that one and don't. In some ways, it's as Adam alluded to me, it's back to the tried and true, and that is doing our jobs so that we can be as much above reproach as possible. Really being transparent, as he mentioned, on sourcing. We have, our company has long been much tighter about anonymous sourcing than many of the national outlets. And it's something I've become even more conservative about, that we have to be able to show where we're getting information. And if someone isn't willing to put their name behind it, we need to be very skeptical about that. And if it's, we would need to have multiple anonymous sources before ever going down that road. I know that still doesn't persuade some people, but I think the more that we can show our work, the better. And I also think that all of us whether it's through things like editor columns or speaking on panels, that we need to kind of get the word out more about how we do work and what we do to ensure that our work is accurate and trustworthy.
I'd kind of echo what Carol's saying is, I liken it a little bit to the Supreme Court several years ago, right after the same-sex marriage ruling, made a really conservative effort to get out there and open themselves up and be more transparent. And they started having hearings that were more open to the public. They drove around the state to make themselves more available, and they didn't just hide in their chambers and make these rulings from on high and expect no one to question them. After they saw the result of the campaigns that were able to be done against them. And I think that's, what Carol mentioned, some of those editorial explanations even. That's something TV, we don't have an editorial section like newspapers do, but I've found myself over the last few years here writing a lot more, not op-eds, but explainer pieces of here's why we covered something or why we didn't cover something or how we covered something, or answering some of those common viewer questions in a more public way. We get in the habit of we'll get emails or letters to the editor and respond to those maybe individually, but being able to respond to those openly, because if one person has that question, there's a good chance many people have those questions. So little things like that just over time. I think, Carol said there's no magic bullet, and I completely agree with you. It's not something I think we can flip the switch on overnight, but we'll take kind of that dedicated focus over time. And one thing that I think is worth noting, the anonymous sources, the national media to me is a real problem in this front, because we, especially at KCRG, we're an ABC affiliate. Quite often we get lumped in with what ABC National News is doing. So if George Stephanopoulos or Robin Roberts is reporting on something, and I've seen them do this in ways that I would not want our newsroom acting in, or using anonymous sources kind of liberally, or the way things are phrased or expressing personal views within newscasts, those get lumped in with us. And that's I think is a real problem. And that's why you see people saying, oh, it's the media. And it kind of lumps in the local media that surveys have shown by and large are more trusted than the national media. But it hurts us because by association. It's guilt by association. And so that's, I think, something that as much as we can at the local level kind of separate ourselves from some of that national reporting, but at the same time, we need that national reporting. I know, not all of us have a bureau in New York or Washington or Miami to be able to cover news on a national scale that does impact us locally here in Iowa, that Iowa readers or viewers want us to see. So it's a real balancing act, but I truly see the national media being an issue there, because they do have separate standards and aren't as locally accountable as, say, Carol and Zack and I are, when we then have to go out to Hy-Vee or walk around the grocery store or walk around the park, and people know us and talk to us and have that more personal relationship than they do with, say, a David Muir or someone on the national level. So,
I think I agree with all of the points made so far, and I think that media literacy is really important, and even how you explain some of the things that you do, to Adam and Carol's points. But there are areas that have different. Are you clearly delineating on a website opinion content that is different than news content? And if you have an RSS feed, is your opinion content separated from, some of these are technical issues, but if you're auto feeding into a website, some of that content can get mixed quickly. And so, there are algorithms that, can control the types of sources that you see news from. And so some of that is consumer driven. And if they're not kind of mindful of that, I think that, they don't even recognize that they may be in a silo of singular opinion. And so there are a lot of different things that kind of control the information that you see. To Adam's point about national sources, as media organizations work together, you're kind of accepting the rules that every other organization plays by. And so those partnerships and those opportunities, you need to be consistent or thoughtful about that. And that's where some of these challenges where, I hear it a lot with some of our wire content of the New York Times or the Washington Post. And these become talking points on cable news outlets and other places. And so I think the more that we can explain choices, the more that we can explain those things, we ride along with those organizations when we run that content. And that's a tricky spot because to Adam's point, we don't have a bureau in DC each day. We don't have our own rules. We apply that as the content comes in, sometimes through the editing process. But to Carol's point earlier on, there are fewer editors in these newsrooms. And so even content from other news sources is getting fewer eyes potentially on it than it did in the past.
So how are you changing the business model of your entities to cope with the sort of the changing appetite of the audience out there? If they aren't subscribing to daily newspapers, or if they're gravitating to smaller publications, is there a way for the Register or the Gazette or Gray Television to sort of modify the business strategy?
So I'm actually fairly optimistic about a subscription model for digital content. We have long had a pay meter so that you get so many articles free and each month, and then you're blocked until you subscribe or until next month. And more we have tried to designate a few stories every day that are for our subscribers only, whether you're print or digital. All print subscribers get an automatic free digital subscription. It's all bundled together. But we have many standalone digital subscribers now. And we think that the math works out, that if we can drive digital subscriptions, that can be a substantial part of the revenue stream in the future. And I'm encouraged about it because some of our very best, like investigative work, are local reporting on just what the city council is doing, new development going on in central Iowa. Those tend to be kind of subscription drivers that our loyal audience, which we define as coming back at least 3 times a week to the website, really gravitate to that sort of basic local news and our investigative reporting. There are always other questions that raises then, though, with a subscription model, and this has always been true somewhat with newspapers. Does it become kind of only the so-called elites that subscribe? Are you really narrow channeling your audience a lot more? We have sort of debates each day about what should be a subscription story and what shouldn't. We have a story slated for tomorrow that is about our refugee community and some of the struggles that those families are having with online learning and getting the technology up and running for children. Often their parents don't speak English, and we decided that we would make that just a regular metered story and not make it subscription, because we want as many people as possible to know about the situation, to consider even donating and volunteering to help our refugee community. So there are certainly some downsides. I think there's a big need in the community for kind of basic service information that may be getting left behind right now.
Yeah, I think Carol makes a really good point. I think subscriptions hold the most promise, I think, right now of everything that every model that's out there to be able to monetize the internet. I mean, that's really the issue, is not trying to monetize the newspaper or monetize TV, but to monetize the internet, which is where most of the audience is going to. Subscription models have it seem to be the most promising, but I have real concerns, to Carol's point, about shutting out parts of your audience or shutting out content from your audience at large, and that creates a void. And we've seen what can fill those voids of information already on social media and everywhere else. So, I think there's it's going to take a concerted, almost industry-wide effort to go the subscription model to carry that out. I've been really hopeful, I think, with Carol's model that they've been doing at the Register. I've seen other newspapers, particularly with coronavirus information, take that outside of their subscription portal and make that more widely available. And I think that's a really good model that kind of tries to balance and walk that fine line between paying for the content and the work that goes into that content, but also making the truly really important information and the things people need to know more widely available and accessible to everybody. One thing I've seen Gray Television really try to leverage a lot more across the board is sponsored content and paid content, to make that a little more, make that a more lucrative option for advertisers to get out there. There's obviously significant ethical concerns. We have a really hard and fast rule that there is a zero sales presence in the newsroom. So any paid content, sponsored content, the news people don't touch that. We don't have a hand in it, but we do have eyes on it. So we're able to review it and make sure it's not something that's misrepresenting, that there is some basic journalistic standards that are being adhered to, even though it's being penned by and with the goal of promoting a sponsor. So that's one thing that I also has pitfalls, just like the subscription model does. So, I think this is one area where the more we can have different outlets experimenting with different platforms and different models is probably the best route to go, because there's so many options out there. I didn't even mention social media sponsorships and being able to do Facebook sponsors and promoted content that way as well. So I think there's a lot of different options out there, but to me, there's no real one clear way forward on this. It's still kind of an experiment as we go and see what we can get to as a collective to figure out what works best.
No, I would agree with the points made so far, and the challenge with subscriptions, and I'm encouraged about that. But it's also, you see the number of people subscribe to one or two things, and then you're competing against those. And so for us, we've tried to evolve. Events like this, Iowa Ideas is one of the pieces. I think it's going to take a multi-pronged approach across everything to build those kind of unique places where you come together and do that. And so events have obviously changed. You've seen a lot of organizations, they were whole hog into that, and COVID, certainly threw a damper at that. But these types of exchanges for us are an important piece. And to the access, we are able to, and we're starting to roll out, and frankly, had libraries not closed for us, where we're going to roll out a program giving, certain community sites free access to the content. And so if you go there to do it, you have a way to access our content for free. And that's, certainly more technical, but I think that's an opportunity for us, because an important aspect is that you're the voice of the community, and you can't be representing only one. And so how do you find ways to connect? And those individual connections still really matter. And for us, kind of the community organizations and partnering where people may be looking for information and opening up ways to get at that is our strategy to kind of keep it inclusive for everyone.
So being a subscriber of the Gazette and the Register, I see content in both publications that is coming, it's about Iowa, but it's not coming directly from the Register staff or the Gazette staff. Is there, in the future, do you see more sharing among the media on reporting efforts?
I certainly hope there will be. I'm a big one in collaboration, and to be completely transparent, Adam and I worked together as one organization when we were. And to Carol, we have a sharing arrangement where we do share content so that we can provide each other, that content. And our staffs are working on projects today where we're trying to do to reach statewide and to provide that content. And I think there is certainly an opportunity to work where we have common interests and common goals. We will be stronger together in unified ways. And the more that we can do that, I think the better it is for all of us.
Over the weekend, we published a project called Iowa Moines. And with that project, we partnered with Lee Newspapers, which has, a number of titles in the state, the Sioux City Journal, Mason City, Quad City Times, Waterloo. And the whole idea of that project was to write news stories about some of the people with COVID-19. And it was a time where we thought, the more we can get people from across the state, river to river, it would be a richer project and really represent what we've lost. And that was a first ever deal. We hadn't partnered with the Lee Newspapers formally before, but we shared all that content back and forth. I think on public service journalism, there's a big avenue for us to collaborate. Through the Iowa Newspaper Association, we're doing some projects together. We've got one that we're just starting on that involves, papers across the state asking for public records of certain types. I think that makes all the sense in the world. We're really not competing with each other so much anymore. I've thought for years, what we're competing for is people's time and attention. And if the more we can help all local media outlets be strong together, then we're better.
TV's in a little bit of a unique situation compared to the newspapers, because there's really only one newspaper in Cedar Rapids and in Des Moines. So the competition factor is a lot higher from a television standpoint. But I think that's something you're going to see change and is already in the process of changing here over the next decade or so with homogenization of ownership. And the Gazette's a perfect example. We were owned not that long ago locally by the Gazette. And we were one of the few at the time, and it's eroded even more since then of the number of locally owned television stations. It's really turned into, there's about 4 or 5 really big owners, and I think you might get down to even 3 ownership groups in TV as some of these smaller groups condense and sell off. And the reason they're doing that is twofold. One is financial. When a big source of revenue for TV stations is retrans agreements, and one of the big costs is network agreements. So 10 years ago or so, we were being paid by ABC to be an ABC affiliate, to carry some of their news content, to carry their network programming, because they needed access to our broadcast tower. And that's how the model was built for decades since the advent of television. They needed access to our broadcast tower to reach people. Well, now with cable, with satellite, with internet, it's become less of a need, and they've started charging us. So we now pay ABC to be able to carry their network content. And that cost has continually gone up and up and up and up. And on the flip side of that, cable providers and satellite providers, we've had to basically recoup that money from them and say, well, we're paying to get this content and you're getting it from us. You need to compensate us for the content that we're providing. And so that's created a lot of what people have seen of blackouts in certain markets of certain TV stations, whether it's depending on the ownership. And that's really contributed to that battle financially back and forth. But the other thing that it's done is it allows us to condense resources. and you're able to run multiple TV stations in a state with fewer resources through content sharing. And so with Gray Television, we're able to access content from stations in the Quad Cities, from Rockford, from Madison, from Sioux Falls, from Omaha and Council Bluffs area. We're able to access some of those through our ownership agreements. And so it opens up a whole new avenue of content sharing. And so I think you're going to see pressures. You know, it's a perfect example. Des Moines has the Des Moines Register. They have one newspaper, but there's three really TV stations, though 4 with newscasts. Why is that? And I think you're going to start to see some of those economic pressures go into questioning whether the Des Moines or other similar sized markets can support 3 or 4, or sometimes in some markets 5 or 6 newsroom operations when you look on the newspaper side and there's one. And so I think you're going to start to see a lot more of the ownership homogenization, and that'll necessitate and really facilitate a lot more content sharing across ownership groups, and a lot less competition, like you're seeing already with the newspaper, being able to share from market to market, much more so than we do now. So we're starting to see some of that with the ownership changes in TV. I think that's only going to accelerate here over the next 10 years because of market pressures, both internally and externally.
A couple of points, Randy, you mentioned seeing different news sources appear in our paper and website. There are a lot of nonprofit news sources that have developed. And for example, Kaiser Health Service does very in-depth reporting on medical issues. And we have used some of their content. Likewise, a more local example, Iowa Capitol Dispatch has 4 reporters now who report on state issues from the Iowa Capitol. 3 of the 4, or all of them, are former Register staffers. I have a great deal of respect for them and their journalistic integrity. But I think it's incumbent upon the head of each publication to really try to vet what the standards for what content that you're going to deliver to readers. With those 2 sources just named, Kaiser and Iowa Capitol Dispatch, I'm very confident in the rigor of their reporting and that they use the same kind of standards for sourcing that we would use. We've also done some joint investigations with ProPublica, and I think that's a good model where often they'll be getting access to like national databases. We'll break out the Iowa information and do a separate story on what's affecting Iowa. One place where I think maybe there is incentive if people like Zack and I can figure out different ways to make it work better for more collaboration. Unfortunately, the Associated Press network within the state of Iowa is kind of a shadow of itself. The rates have gone up enough, and that many papers within the state are no longer AP members. And so, in years ago, the Register really prided itself on its statewide report. And in much of Randy's era, we had correspondents all over the state that we paid so that in every county, they would call in or send in dispatches. But even when that sort of faded away, you would have enough daily newspapers that were part of the Associated Press that we could put out a really good, robust kind of state report each day on things happening all over Iowa. And I think that helped reinforce the cohesion in the state. And it's a state where so many people have moved from rural areas to more urban areas that there's a lot of interest in news statewide. We're no longer able to deliver that through the AP. And I think if we can forge kind of informal relationships with papers around the state so that we can share more news, I think we'd be better off.
No, that's true. And I think, we represent some of the larger news organizations in the state, but there are more than 200 newspapers in the state of Iowa that still exist. And so how you communicate, and some of those organizations are one or two people. And so finding ways to build those connections and kind of keep them tight are important. And so some of those responsibilities, I think, have shifted from groups like the Associated Press to, okay, how are we going to, band together and create that backbone that allows us to communicate quickly and efficiently and without having to go out of our way to think about it, because when news happens, it happens and you don't necessarily have 10 hours to respond. And so it's tricky.
Zack alluded to the number of newspapers in Iowa, the weekly newspapers. There's, I think, more than 250. This year was a milestone year in the typical 2020 milestone, which means it's not good. Marion County, which is where Pella and Knoxville are the largest communities. Marion County became the first Iowa county that is, I guess you would call it the news desert. There no longer are newspapers published in that county. Appanoose County down in south central Iowa has one newspaper left that is on the border of the county in a community of 200 or 300 people. Centerville, the county seat, is without a newspaper. Should readers and viewers in Iowa be worried that this year we saw the start of a trend that is going to build, or is this an aberration, do you think?
Well, I don't want to wear the outfit of the Grim Reaper, but I think it is deeply concerning because I do think that there are a lot of organizations that are probably in pretty tough straits, and it's happening for a variety of reasons. Whether it's the local retail dries up in a community, so advertising support dries up. It could be subscriptions. It could be access or web content if you don't provide that. And so I think there are a variety of reasons that it's happening. But I'm steadfast that when the community loses a news source, it loses a piece of its core because these organizations go and ask questions to people. And really dive deeper into things that is in the community good. And so anytime this happens, people should be concerned about that. No matter where it happens, the community is getting weaker.
Well, that was a cheery thought. Thanks, Zack.
Sorry, Randy.
Well, I have been a journalist. I make Carol look young. I started more than 50 years ago. And it seems to me that the newspaper is oftentimes is sending reporters to the school board meeting or the city council meeting in a community of maybe it's a few thousand people, and telling people what's going on with their local institutions, that the citizens in their busy lives these days don't have the time to commit. And I worry what this means for these communities, how local civic leaders are able to share knowledge and information, hopes and dreams with the local residents without a voice that people are turning to.
I'm curious too, Randy, to see what fills that void, because inevitably, I mentioned it earlier, when you don't have a newspaper, you don't have journalism, you don't have a TV station, it creates a void that people will fill. We've got Facebook, we've got Twitter, we've got countless other social media channels out there. I think it will end up being filled somehow. The question is, will it be filled constructively, where you see communities creating their own newsletters within city government to help keep people informed, whether the live stream capabilities that we've seen really take off under the pandemic, if those make government more accessible and transparent, or if it becomes the trolls that on social media that really take over and start propagating fake news and false rumors and let those run rampant without a check of a local journalist or a newspaper to keep that in check. So I think there's potential where it could be, you could see good things take shape, but we've seen the potential for the bad too. So there's a real worry there in any place that loses all of its newspaper access like that.
Randy, I do think Adam touched on something that's a sliver of hope, and that's better tools for governments to be transparent. And I noticed there were several representatives of government that signed up for this panel, and I would really encourage you to look at, whether it's, doing Zoom meetings as a matter of course as we go forward. I think there are all sorts of ways to make government even more transparent on the web. In essence, you can post every bill on the web, every check that's cut, every ordinance, et cetera, et cetera. Make it, as easy as possible for people to follow what the government is doing. Obviously, Randy is chairman of the Freedom of Information, executive director of the Freedom of Information Council, is a champion of open records, but open records in the sense of, you can go down at the courthouse to look at them isn't very open. and I think there's all sorts of ways for government to be very proactive about being more open on the web, and society would benefit from that. I still think you need journalists then to ask the tough questions and do the analysis, but fuller transparency from government would be a good start.
Well, and Carol hits on a really good point there when you talk about the open records laws in Iowa. Needing strengthening, quite frankly. We've seen, especially this year with the pandemic response, some, we'll say, questionable interpretations of what's allowed to be published and what should be published and what should be open records for people. And I know all three of us, Zack, Carol, and I have all been involved in really fighting for getting that information and publicizing it. And that goes towards some of the requirements to maybe open up government a little bit more. And I think Iowa's open records laws in general need a real hard look. The challenge is really expecting and pushing our politicians and our political leaders to do it, because they're the ones who will ultimately end up being held accountable by those open record laws that they would then write on themselves. But it's really paramount that we strengthen our open record laws and maybe look at some of those requirements that Carol's talking about of requiring governments to publish them and make it more accessible and make it more open and transparent.
And I would agree with everything that's been said. And I think that the pandemic has pointed out some of the equalization that occurs. The internet connection is our ability to really be transparent. And I'm encouraged, with some of the unique partnerships that have kind of come up in our district for court. For example, we've been able to, they couldn't fit as many people into the courtroom in some of the key public cases. And so we partnered with the court system in terms of building access so that we could live stream additional court proceedings as part of that. And that's a win for everyone. It's a win for the families that want to see justice served. It's good for everyone to understand how the process works. It's good for the public health without needing to be in close contact of a confined space. And it allows the wheels of justice to continue to be served. And so to me, those are wins. And so I think there are opportunities that have come kind of coincidentally, where that would have been harder to make happen if they needed to be part of a policy change, but just out of some connections and common goals have been able to happen in this. And I hope to see some of that momentum continue.
And I think it's really interesting with those court cases, and I've seen this with city council meetings too, Zach, the number of people who tune in and watch those, because we get to see the live analytics of who's watching on a YouTube feed or a Facebook feed. And a typical courtroom hearing, even on a really big case, maybe has 50 people in there who are interested.
Right.
And these are mundane hearings that we've had for some of them have been a little more interesting than others, but even mundane ones are getting hundreds, if not thousands of people watching this live. So it tells me that there is an interest and people would watch a city council meeting, because even city council is another one. You see, 20, 30 people at best in city council chambers watching those on a typical city council meeting. But you're seeing hundreds, if not thousands, tuning into a stream. So if you make it more accessible, I think there is an appetite out there and people will be able to and willing to tune in more. So that's another reason for optimism, I think, and another reason to push more of that accessibility that Carol and Zack are talking about.
You have 4 news nerds on this panel, that to throw names out there. But I think that when you're able to watch a video, it's more meaningful than reading minutes of a meeting, because you're able to understand interpretation, you're able to see things a little bit differently. And so I think, that instant availability that we've seen through some of the Zoom streaming and other mechanisms have been very helpful to kind of getting closer to that core of, how things were delivered. You're able to just watch at your convenience.
Yeah.
We're in our final 10 minutes or so here. So I wanted to shift your attention back to the protests this summer in the wake of the death of George Floyd. What are you hearing from your customers? Are they telling you that your coverage is too anti-police? Or are you hearing that you are too anti-protesters? And how have you walked the line between these conflicting perceptions with your coverage?
I'm hearing both personally. We'll get, which tells me we're doing something right. If you're angering both sides, that means you're in the middle. But I joke about that, but we absolutely get that feedback. I mean, this is a very contentious issue where people have passionate feelings. So inevitably, people will reach out to us and think that we've missed the mark on one side or the other. And we're not perfect. So there have been times I think we could have done better here or there, whether it's, being more fair to protesters or to police. But I think the big thing that we've focused on is it's forced us to have some really pointed conversations and powerful conversations, not just about the issue of race, but in how we cover race and how our words really matter. I think we've seen that resonate, particularly with this issue. Whether, a perfect example of, do you call them protesters or do you call them riots? Do you call them looters? And who makes that decision and what is that distinction and why it matters? So having those conversations in the newsroom are probably the most powerful tool we have to try and toe that line, but it's not easy, and inevitably we're going to get criticism on either side. But I think that's where it starts, is having those conversations, those open, honest conversations with your reporters, who are then going out there and picking, or editors picking which word to use and knowing why it matters.
Zack?
I think you'd certainly hear, and I agree with a lot of what Adam is saying, is we've been hearing from both sides, and I think that there are more than two sides in this issue, frankly, and I think that it comes down to that explaining and some of the different transparency. There's steps in the process, and they're important pieces of, okay, how does the process work or not work to make some of this change happen? That's explanatory reporting that needs to happen. And policies, government bodies aren't the quickest necessarily at crafting policy. And so, when there's a huge appetite for change. What are the pros and cons? And that's important to really work through, understanding what are the different steps of getting there. And so I think that's important work that organizations need to do. And I agree with the conversations about the choosing the words. How do you characterize things? How do you explain? And how do you push? And how do you push respectfully? Because these are systemic issues, and sometimes we frequently cover some of these topics, and the policies that we have in our own newsrooms. What do they do to reinforce stereotypes? And I think that those are important things in how we gather news that we need to be working through, and it comes in how you portray the community. And so there's a lot of work internally within the organization to do to respond to this as well.
Carol, we're down to just a few minutes left, but I wanted to touch base with you about the Register's coverage of protests, because you've ended up making the news more than you have covered it in some respects. And I don't mean that as a knock. One of your reporters was arrested and is still facing charges. Another couple of members of your staff have been tear gassed. What's your view of this? Is the media doing something wrong, or is this evidence of police? Are we expecting too much from them, or is this an indication of police perhaps trying to discourage news coverage?
Well, first of all, I would say that there is an absolute First Amendment right for the press to be public demonstrations, covering them. We're there to cover the entire spectrum of what protesters are saying and doing, and what police are doing in response. I'd echo some of the earlier things said by Adam and Zack, in that journalists are not there to take any side. And we often make everyone pretty much upset with us. We got criticism by some protesters because we did not turn off the camera when they were doing things that resulted in charges against them, like pulling off decals from a police car, or lighting matches near a courthouse, lighting different things near a courthouse. We are there to record and to report what's going on, period. On the other hand, there has been tension between our reporters and editors and various police departments. I think that tension always exists, in that our job is to hold the police accountable. Law enforcement are public employees. They're there representing the public, hired by the public. They're also authorized to carry weapons. That carries a great amount of responsibility. And so it is the job of the press to scrutinize how well they're responding. We certainly are fighting in court to get the charges dropped against our reporter. I think there are questions raised in many in lawsuits, as well as public questions before the council about whether or not there has been overreach by police and how they've responded, and that will continue to be a subject of our reporting.
Hey, Randy, I know that we had a couple
Thank you.
questions. I know we're close to time, but there were a couple questions that got tossed in the chat that I thought we could take up real quickly. Why not less reliance on Washington Post, New York Times, and larger media, and more sourcing from independents? I think is a question that we hear a lot. And I think, for organizations, we try to still present national news and viewpoints from other places. How Iowa is seen in the world and those types of things. And to do that and to cover some of the breaking news, we rely on some of those wire sources to kind of supplement the coverage. We still have a portion in the Gazette that I hear from regularly that don't have a cable subscription or internet access. And so they still use this information to kind of make sense of the world. And Carol, I don't know if there was anything you wanted to throw in on sources from other places.
Well, we too focus almost all of our attention on Iowa news. So for our print product and even on our website too, I do think people are looking for some national and international news. So we depend on Associated Press and then our national bureau that's maintained by Gazette in Washington, D.C. and national stories to post. We do try the best we can to look at those and look at sourcing, but not nearly as closely as we do our own reporting. And I will say some of the things that you do these days to cut costs, such as there's a common national world page that all the Gazette papers carry. I don't choose what those national stories are on that page. It's chosen by a national desk. I may not even agree with the choices being made for that page, but I know I don't have a person free to put together one of our own.
I think the other thing that's worth mentioning too is the copyright aspect. You guys have a service with the Associated Press or with the Washington Post. We have ones with ABC and with CNN. We can't just grab content from other outlets or other entities because that's a copyright infringement, and we could face lawsuits over that. So there does have to be financial considerations on that end too, of how many of those services do you want to pay for or can afford to pay for to be able to have multiple outlets contributing content in that way.
Were there other questions you had that you wanted to deal with, Zach?
The only other one was, have local media outlets considered bundling subscriptions with other digital media sites? And Carol, you with USA Today and the network there maybe have more experience than we do when it comes to that. So maybe if you want to start there.
We're considering it. It's kind of a sticky wicket. For example, the Gazette owns both the Ames Tribune and the Register, of course, and some more weeklies right around Dallas and Story and Boone counties. If we made it too attractive, then we're going to be losing money on those what have been standalone subscriptions. So they're trying to look and see if there's something we can pull together on that.
Well, I want to thank everybody for, particularly the panelists, for spending an hour with us this morning. And I want to thank the audience for tuning in. Iowa Ideas is a terrific idea, a terrific conference. And so I would invite you to check the schedule, and I hope to hear from you in another session. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Randy. Thanks, everyone.